Hello, welcome back to my channel. For those who don't know, I'm a writer and I have released a children's middle grade book. In either case, today we're gonna have a writing vlog. So I felt extremely motivated because we had our first autumn drinks, and I think that's the perfect way to kick off myself out of a slump. Specifically, if you've been following myself, I mentioned several times that I really want to talk about character creation. So today we're going to talk about characters and how to develop them, and it's no way going to be of any type of workshop or anything. It's going to be just a quick sort of rundown of specific pointers that I like to think about, and it's not a guideline. So really it's just something to play with if you kind of in a slump or need a little bit of like new triggers to get your characters going. I wrote down this sort of like things I thought about creating character setting and whatnot in my last novel, because I felt like it was such a big monster and I felt like it's actually worth of a guideline in that sense. So in any sense, the character section was the widest one. So the first part of it you should be mindful of is, determining your cast, because there's very different sort of feel of the stories that you have, like tiny cast, like, few characters that are main, or you have a massive cast. And my last story was about 15, I believe, if not more, 15 characters, and they all were pretty prominent because I had like almost like a university college setting. So I had to have like certain panel of teachers, every faculty represented with at least one student, literally had lists of like, this is the faculty, this is the teachers, this is the students for this faculty, any extras, whatever. So like I had pages and pages of that. And there was also transfer students. So like, it really depends on the setting. So first of all, you have to figure out what are you writing and what is your setting before going into characters, I would believe, because like I say, if you're writing university and school, that's automatically becomes a wider set. Names is a big thing for me. If you read my middle grade, you will find out that I like to play with the names and just make them funny or like, silly in any way. So like Pink Legs was one of the names of the characters. So I really like playing with them, and I like the gimmick. I know like gimmick is usually probably shows you a bad writing rather than a good writing, but I really like the gimmick. I like gimmick in the shows when I watch it. If I hear it, like it's intentional. That feeling of intention is actually something I really enjoy. And that's literally what I wrote in this guide. It's not the Nobel Prize worth writing, but it's fun. And if you watch my channel for any time, all I care about is fun. So I said, have fun and curse your characters with something that would be made fun for. So I had a character that I named Gunson, as sort of like a twist of son of a gun. And it just used to be a old curse, let's say. But also he doesn't use the gun. He's like the only character that doesn't use the gun. I thought that was just fun to play with. And the names and just mention of the names can actually fill out your cast. So, there's more than just the mains that our camera focuses on. So that's another way to play it. I did a sort of mention of a like student list and some of the extra names that might not necessarily be playing a big role, but that's a way to fill it out, I guess. Narrator. Narrator is not a big section I have to talk about, but I feel like narrator doesn't have to be likable or unique. sometimes it is very support that we would be rooting for, such as like Lord of the Rings, we root for Samwise because he's such a lovely character. And in Avatar, we actually see like a lot of Zuko's arc. So like even if we have main character and like the traditional arc or something, we sometimes root for some sort of support character more than for the main. I mentioned that in this, obviously it's not. So I said, don't over-focus on giving everything to your main character, which is like very fair point. And I'm just sharing the points, honestly. It might be very obvious. Now, character arcs. I wrote, give at least a hint of existing character arc to everyone. You might not be a part to see it, but you know we are breathing and existing in their own way. Yeah, so this is where I mentioned as well, thinking about character arcs. There are several things that you can think about. So obviously, if you had read The Cat Saves the Novel, and we say like about how characters at school, how characters at work, what is their shard, so like the thing that broke them to have certain belief. I wanted to explore on that and say that I like thinking about beliefs or a lie to sometimes be a mantra that you can be breaking, which would be the same thing. But another thing that we might not necessarily mention is fears. I find that not only vicious and give the character drive, but often if you figure out what is their fear, it might actually make them act a certain way. So I do like to think about the fears as well. Yeah, and I found that it's very nice to explore your fears because sometimes the characters can be representative of your own fears. So if you're not quite figuring the character, it could be that he has certain fear that you're not ready to tackle yet. You know, it's a way of like exploring it, really. Now another thing is quirks. Quirks is a really big thing for me as well, as you can tell from the name alone, because this is actually something I picked up watching things like Critical Role, where I'm like much more interested of not the main sort of, we go to the battle scenes, we go to the fight, but actually the most interesting parts are that not necessarily writing the plot, but their interactions or secret little actions and mischiefs. So that's the quirks. They actually get you bond with the character even more. So I think that's what makes you care about character much more. So something we do off stage, off plot. Which I know a lot of people say like everything has to feed the plot, everything has to feed something. And I think I little bit disagree because I find that, again, we're not talking about Nobel Prize writing, we're talking about having fun. I found that the fun elements really that make it more sort of immersive. Dialogue. Dialogue is the next part, and again, that's pretty important. I like, especially in other shows, let's say when you see that character, through the dialogue, you see that character does not have insight. I think these sort of unreliable sort of comments or lacking insight is actually the most fun part to play with. And I also wrote that sometimes if a character says something along the lines like, oh, you don't belong here, or why are you here? It could also mean that you shouldn't have, that is saying it to you, that you shouldn't have brought that a character, that your own doubt is shining through it, and that maybe you shouldn't have constructed the scene a certain way. You know, yeah, I feel like sometimes if something is not glistening on the page, it could also be that there is a bit of a construct error, and it's just sort of your brain is trying to warn you about it. And then I wrote character deaths. Does character have to die, and is it just a lazy way to end an arc? There's something to think about because I actually, on a rewrite, I think I revived 3 characters that I thought was lazily killed. And that there are much worse endings for characters than death. So here we are. I wrote a version to consider if there is a worse fate for this particular character than death. And I wrote, when I fix my characters and made them not killed. I realized that, first of all, some of the characters, you can tell that you kill them prematurely because you feel like their arc was not complete. And it was sort of a device for protagonists to, or a story to progress, but it doesn't mean that the arc for the character that died prematurely was complete. Then I thought that one of the last characters, again, it's either arc, but also the character was important to someone else. So murdering that character might not have helped the other person. So like the characters are all interconnected. I know a lot of people do like connection maps, which I still don't do, but you know, I'm still a developing writer as well, to be honest. Okay, and my favorite part, and that's one of the things what I wanted to film this today for, is that I like to think about dualities. I like to think about characters as sort of Venn diagram, something where they are polar opposites for. So, and not only making it for your main character, but making it in multiple ways in the plot or multiple characters in the plot. So in my previous story, for example, was a main character and like antagonist were sort of connected with like privilege. The one is very privileged, the other one is a low privilege. And this circle actually helps you to think how to develop this story, because then we can climb the privilege while the other side drops the privilege. That's only example, so not necessarily the privilege, but status and power, but that sort of example. Or for example, the curse, and you can have the curse of two different people having the same curse. One of them suffers significantly, the other one manages to overcome it or be strengthened by it. So sort of thinking of these circles and the journey as the opposite spectrums and making it throughout the story, and different characters having their own spectrum and their own stories of circle. It really helps me to think about what I want to do with my characters and where I want them to end up. So if you are stuck, this is something you can think about. Anyway, so these are things I wanted to talk. Is actually felt much more on the page, like much more written on a page than I had said to you, but these are things to think about. That did you kill your character meaninglessly? How your characters represent polar opposites, and anything quirky and funny about them, including the names. So like, it's not a massive thing to add, but I think that these things were not necessarily included, like in Save the Cat, and something that could get you going and driving through the story, including that main story that you're already working on. So something to help you dig a little bit deeper, find some things to, you know, just have fun. The biggest thing is always the message. Just have fun with it. Gamify. Gamify. I love this, to be honest. I love gamifying everything and breaking things down. That's all about the writing part. I want to do a little drawing part. So like part 2 to the character building, development. I want to do some design. I want to do some character design and just sketching. So I am very into yokai spirits, and I think it's always been like to some degree there. I write a lot of ghost spirit stories, and it's almost unintentional that I find out about myself and like, oh, this story also has ghosts. Oh, this story also has spirits. Sadly, it's not intentional a lot of times, but it just happens. I think it's part of that personality. Sorry, made some coffee. So I decided to pick some yokai and try to sort of design my own sketch of it, or my own take on it, or just have fun and sketch. So I picked some first one as a very common spirit, and definitely seen around, a lantern spirit. So I'm using this Mizuki Shigeru dictionary of yokai because I think he was one of the big people who actually wrote about spirits and made a catalog out of them. This is in French, so I had to translate it, but basically this tells a story about that lantern spirit is basically a regular lantern that keeps growing and one day might get human-like characteristics. Even wings and it says something about snatching babies as well, and so on. But I think it's very fascinating to think about like normal day objects and how they sort of become monsters and spirits. I feel like the story that I'm writing right now, I stopped writing because it wasn't moving forward, which I called Mansion Investigators Project. It was about Monster Ghost Mansion, and I think it wasn't moving very much so because I haven't really been working visually or like thinking visually about the monsters and appearances in that mansion. So I think this actually might be able to reignite that project. In either case, I'm just having fun with you guys. So let's start drawing. So if you notice a lot of design people do this like sort of like a mindstorm brainstorm. And my brain is now currently working for words, so that's why we're doing a lot of more visual things. So I wrote the name Chochin Obake, or like Chochin is a lantern. Sorry for my pronunciation. In either say I go down saying lantern, light source. And I thought it would be, I actually had more ideas on this one, thinking about then the, why is it mysticized? And I thought about trapped moths and bugs inside that making a rattle and a noise. And obviously, for especially child's imagination, it can become sort of a monster, like something is in there, there's shadows in that light source. So I think that track of mine really got me, because then I of course thought about these sort of moth shapes, and I don't know if you can see my thin lining moth shapes and how we can have these sort of like circles like eyes. And I thought about obviously the hole, the rip in there, and you can see one of these circles and it looks like an eye. So already sort of started thinking about that. I wrote summer because it was specified in the story about summer lanterns. Then I wrote grow because it grows in size in that myth, and eyes, tongue, other common human characteristics. I definitely going with that eye. I think that idea definitely got my mind, is something on my mind. Then I want to make it a circle potentially. We can have a couple of shapes when we think about lantern. We think about circle, let's see, like this, and we can think about more oblong, which I think was in that example, as well as many people like show them more like this. We obviously have other shapes of lanterns as well. And I was also thinking, can we at all modernize this to any other sort of traditional light or anything? Let's write it shapes. Sorry about being so slow. But then I'm thinking, if it was a circle, very recognizable shape, right? One of the things about why it looks like a mouth, it was mentioning about this, like a rib that makes its shape. So I don't know if you can see because I'm doing it very weakly, but making these lines that form this shape. I think because a lot of people use this shape, I want to actually go with a circle. It's also possibly cuter. And then we basically said mouth is like a rib. But if we did the same picture that I showed with the eye, so we just make a little rip of a gap. But we don't necessarily need to have mouth and everything. We can have just like a eye. I don't know if it's reasonable enough. But we see, or we can, what I mentioned with the moth, I was also thinking, what about if it just looks like a shadow? Like some shadow. And the next thing maybe just a shadow on this. So that way we can make a mouth as well. So I made shape like this of the whole, like sort of like downwards, and the eye like this. But obviously every single detail you can break into shapes. I do like this one. It's very simple and I like that. But then I could have made it the other way around. You know, all sorts of shapes. You can make grip like otherwise like this. For some reason I don't like this as much. but then obviously it might look more vile because then you can make this other rib like an eyebrow above it, and these ribs go around, and one of these ribs can be like an eyebrow. Now, none of these will be originals because obviously we are based on something, but we want to make them sort of somehow interesting. And then for some reason I want a handle. I can just imagine someone carrying this and there's like an eye. Just automatically makes it even creepier. I really want a handle for that reason. And when I think about this, can you imagine that if going that direction, can you imagine summer, right? Summer, we don't do that anymore, but if you know the lanterns that used to be lifted in the air, which is huge fire risk, honestly. Can you imagine them all just lifting these faces? You know, make a tangled version of yokai. Yokai version of Tangled, sorry. I think like seeing something creepy in this shadows, like, oh, is it like a hand, that's skeleton hand that's reaching from there, and then the hole appears. Oh gosh, my imagination is just the most magical. I would love to make like either a cartoon or a comic book of yokai spirits. So I was actually thinking about coming back to the idea of the monsters, monster investigator sort of thing, and thinking, can I make it as a graphic novel instead? But I really like the artistic flair. But yeah, that was fun. Let me find another monster for us. These little guys, but they are gonna be much more complicated. So let me have a little bit of a read. So these little guys called Funa Yuri. Which is basically a boat of ghosts, really. I'm not drawing that specific ghost because I want to still think about ghosts that can live in a mansion, just in case I do consider to write about it. But I want to take the symbolics from the image of them. They have these little, like, almost like a buckets of some sort that we use to transfer the water. However, and the little triangle that we see in Japanese culture a lot for the ghosts, I would like to keep the robe and triangle and give the broom instead. I know it doesn't make any sense, but I thought like just that image of like sweeping ghost. I kind of want to draw that. So we have like a sweeping ghost. And we want to have like a broom of sorts as an attribute, and we want to have one of these little triangles. Again, can't tell if you can see anything. Let me just use the thicker marker and then one of the triangles. I'm just drawing freehand, so they are absolutely obscure images, not necessarily having a lot of shape. So first of all, let's try with like, start with the triangle, and then we said a robe. Robe is another attribute as a lot of ghosts, but instead of just being a random ghost, which is still gonna be random, to be fair, we're gonna see this little ghost sweeper, which I thought is an absolutely cute idea. To have a sweeping ghost. And remember, this is a robe, so it's a robe. Also, I don't know if we should just make the robe up to the floor, because it's a very interesting thing, right? The ghosts don't have feet in some of the versions, right? I wonder if we should just show like darkness inside the robe somewhere, like in between this robe. And then obviously we have things that are tying this robe. So yeah, ghosts don't have feet in some of these myths, especially if we're wearing like this ghostly attributing of its own. But I really would like a sweeping ghost. And the funny thing I would like to say, because it's a drowned spirits, which doesn't have to be, because none of these attributes specifically I think are meant to be for this, but because this is a drowned spirit, the other funny thing would be that if it walks and just constantly leaves like muddy wet footprints and like is constantly sweeping, it's kind of miserable, but it's sweeping, but it's also leaving its own footprint. You can tell my inability to draw, especially quickly without like clear plan. But I'm actually thinking about making them into more proper images. I'm thinking how to make it simplified enough, but also sort of more visually appealing. I did kind of like one of these lanterns, right? I made a bit of a contour around it, but I do kind of like one of them. So lanterns obviously are much easier to draw than human beings, but we'll figure it out. In either case, I think I have some ideas and some sort of spark. I thought this was supposed to show like demonstration of like just processing and like what do you want to keep for your character when you creating a character, what are the traits that are attractive to you and what are the traits that are important to you, and you just keep them and you can enhance them, make even bigger, make some sort of twist, like I said, about shadows inside the lantern that is specific for you or you can like really engage with. Same for writing, but I thought I'd give a bit of a taste of just sketching and ideas because my words are not working for a moment. Either way, thank you for joining me for this exploration of the characters. It's very different from my usual vlogs, but I hope that it sort of sparked a bit of ideas and you wanting to explore one specific like topic or something and just go into it and just like sketch and draw.